In the previous section, we described considerations when choosing an appropriate RT target for your real-time application. By the end of this module, you'll be able to describe considerations for the host interface of a real-time application. So when we talk about a host in a real-time application, that's typically going to be a non-deterministic computer, typically running a desktop operating system, that provides some form of user interface to interact with your real-time system. Keep in mind the real-time system itself typically does not have any kind of user interface. It relies on communication with a second machine, the host machine, to provide that. So, one of the first things we'll need to consider when determining how to program our host side is what type of interface the application needs. We see a lot of different types of interfaces out there. Some of the most common are a diagnostic, an analysis system, a configuration, and an operator interface. You may also have an application that doesn't have any host interface at all. We would typically call these a headless system. So for a diagnostic interface, this may be something where you connect up to your real-time system and check the system health, check for error state, see how the system is doing. We do ship a couple of example diagnostic interfaces. You may be familiar with the Distributed System Manager, which does ship with LabVIEW. This is a tool that you can use to determine the memory usage, the CPU usage, and the general system health of your real-time system. You may also build your own, which would be a host VI that would display some diagnostic information published by the controller. You may have an analysis system interface. This is going to be an interface that will receive data from the target, analyze, and display data. So we're going to see in these types of interfaces very frequently a selection of which channels you wish to analyze, a waveform graph that shows the data, and some form of post-processing to determine if this is good or bad data. So a pretty common operation here would be to receive, process, log to disk, and perhaps alarm if necessary. Say if you're reading vibration data from a system and you find that the vibrations are over a certain safety limit, you may want to activate an alarm to let people know about that. Start flashing that big red light, or perhaps initiate some form of action on the real-time system. You may also need a configuration tool interface. For example, to apply a new configuration to the application. Say your application has, I don't know, an INI file or an XML file that's used to determine the acquisition rate, the alarm limits, default values, what are the conditions for a safe state transition, those sorts of things. You may also want on your configuration tool the ability to remotely restart your RT target. We do ship some tools that could be considered as configuration tools. The one you're probably most familiar with is Max. This is a tool that will let you install software to your target, and it will also let you reformat your target, reboot your target. Besides Max, if you wanted to write your own, you could certainly write a host VI with configuration and restart functionality, or perhaps a host VI to replicate and back up an RT target disk image. And we'll actually talk a bit more about replication and deployment functionality in a later lesson as well. Probably the most common of all the host interfaces is going to be an operator interface. This would be a panel that permits a user to interact with the system. So for example, including a start and stop button, including a location where they can modify the recipe for an industrial process. A emergency stop button is always popular. This is also a place that may allow the operator to configure the task that the system is meant to perform. Perhaps adjusting the alarm limits on the fly, perhaps clearing or acknowledging an alarm that has occurred. This may occur on the operator interface. A pretty common question that we receive is, where does this interface need to be? Where should it be implemented? You may have different components on the same host computer, or you might distribute the different pieces throughout multiple computers on your network. Some examples. If you're building an embedded vehicle system, say a laptop-based data logger that connects to a compact RIO, you're probably going to want to have both diagnostic and configuration interfaces on a single machine. Typically, you don't want to have a server setup with 7 different machines on a rack in the passenger seat of a vehicle. It doesn't make much sense. You're going to want to keep it as small as possible. For an embedded data logger system, you may want to have a configuration interface on one machine that has access, and an analysis interface to view data and see results, potentially on many computers out on the network. And similarly, for a machine control system, you may want to have an operator interface connected on a host computer connected directly to the CompactView to control and monitor the application. Typically, that's going to be a one-to-one relationship. In this first exercise, we're going to set up the CompactView device, configure it in Max, and take a look at the user interface VI that's going to be used with the course project that we'll be developing throughout this course.